Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Bold Explorer Live. We are live. Thank you very much for joining me on the, what is it, the 7th? The 8th of June, 2020. 2020. We're using a new machine, ladies and gentlemen, to get the show going. And I am just still not au fait with a number of things. Just want to try that to see if that makes the exposure a bit better. I've just had to reset all the profiles and things. I think that's a bit better. That's not too overexposed, isn't it? I'm on early by 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I'm just making sure that the stream is working properly. So yeah, sorry about that. I know, excuse me, yawning. It's just been one of those days. So hopefully this is all in focus and it's all working properly and you can hear me. I just had to revamp everything. So this is on a completely new computer. So we've got lovely Jeff Kellison there. Hello, Jeff, to you and to Adrian, to Linda, to Mike, to the lovely Julia, to Ed Loud. And I'm sure a few others are going to come along. We're doing the last of I Saw Two Englands by H.V. Morton. This should be the last chapter in here today. I'm rather hopeful that we can get to the end. Chapter 10 in this book. It may be... for those people who've been in touch and said, oh, you know, I'd like a copy of this book, is the one with pictures the same as the other one. From what I gather from Linda Kane, who's got an original 1940 version, this is a reprint and I think it's abridged. However, it's still got the basics of the story. In this chapter, my journey ends with some reflection on travel in England during the Great Inertia. Then comes 1940, Dunkirk and reality, which we are getting close to 80 years ago. It's not working. All I've got is black. Oops, the phone was turned back to front. I don't know, Mr. Loud. How can you allow that to happen? Right, let us see how we get on, shall we? We'll crack on with this because we don't want to muck about. Try and get through this chapter and make this one the end. And then I've got an idea for another book if you're interested. There are certain places in England where a boot jack becomes part of the bedroom furniture. Oakham in the county of Rutland is one of them. I had a bedroom at the Crown which might have been slept in by Jorrocks. The hotel reflected the ease, the elegance and the wealth of a happier and, in respective, ideal England. Silver candlesticks gleamed everywhere. Hanging upon the walls of rooms and passages were acquaintance of horsemen. Acquaintance. Is that post pictures? Acquaintance. And hounds, horses and hounds, of men in pink astride attenuated hunters, of dismounted men lying in ditches, of cub hunters saluting the perfect morn. Yes. There was a sitting room, curtained and chintzed, entirely from top to bottom in a fabric which depicted hounds in full cry and coaches rattling along the turnpike roads. Many of them of Oakham had, so I gathered, gone off to the war, and in the atmosphere of the bar, with its prints and relics of a past age, anyone might have been forgiven the impression that the war to which they had gone was Napoleon's, not Hitler's. The saddler was offering for sale two excellent revolvers, one an automatic and the other a Webley. I looked at them, thinking that it might be a good idea to get a firearms certificate and buy one of them. Then I dismissed the idea as rather fantastic. There was pheasant for dinner. It's a strange non sequitur, isn't it? In the sombre Georgian bedroom that was a notice signed by V.A. Barnacle saying that in no circumstances may the curtains be interfered with between sunrise between sunset and sunrise. As I slipped into the four-poster bed, there was a hot water bottle in it. I wondered what the Georgians would have made of this age. The world, since Waterloo, has been nothing to boast about. It has gone from bad to worse. We've piled up money, machines and discontent, and now the whole conception of Western civilization is in the melting pot for the second time in less than a quarter of a century. Not one gleam of candlelight must escape from Oakham into the night, for the death ships may come from Germany, raiding through the sky just as the Teuton pirates came riding through East Anglia in the days of Rome. When I opened my eyes in the morning, a chambermaid was interfering with the curtains. "It's a fine frosty morning, sir." Imagine that, waking up and finding a chambermaid in your bedroom. I journeyed south I journeyed south to present my last letter of introduction to the principal of an agricultural college. I came to an ugly Edwardian mansion which had once been the home of an industrialist baron. The pupils sleep in the house and pursue their activities on the home farm. Among the pupils were girls of the Women's Land Army. As we were walking round, a shapeless female figure in voluminous garments passed among the weeping landscape. Her feet, in gumboots, made great kisses as she withdrew them from the gluttonous earth. "She used to be a fashion artist," said the principal. Another figure in corduroy breeches clumped past with a spade across her shoulder. "She was a typist," said the principal. "No, I'm wrong. A lady's hairdresser." A herd of wet cows came slowly down the lane, presided over by a girl with fair fluffy hair. She hovered on the flanks, grasping a small hazel switch, with which now and again she administered a... I wonder if she means twig. Now and again, which she administered a timid tap. "She," commented the principal, "used to be a children's nurse." So I watched a fraction of the Women's Land Army pass on its duties. 45 women and girls from every kind of city job had recently started a month's course in farming. At the end of the month, they would be fitted out by the government with garments suitable for the tropics, and then turned out into the wintry countryside. Many more women had volunteered for farm work than farmers can at the moment employ. But if the Ministry of Agriculture's scheme for the cultivation of an additional 1.5 million acres come to pass, I am told there will be hardly a land girl out of work by the time the next harvest is gathered. Land girls, like women in general, are of course two kinds, true and false. The false are those who, having appreciated rural scenery during the periods of prolonged drought, believed that they would like to go back to the land. They rapidly discovered that farming is among the hardest jobs on earth, and that nature is by no means what she seemed during a holiday in September. With something of a shock, such workers discover that the dame has moods of revolving callousness in which she evidently hates man and beast, and such agriculturalists are probably wise to retire speedily from the fray. "Mind you," said the principal, "women are deceptive. Some of the toughest to look at turn out to be the softest, and some of the sweet little ones, with girlish laughs and big blue eyes, will wallop in the pigsties, and then ask as a great favour if they can put in overtime in the cowsheds. I remember a girl in the last course who came to me one morning and said, 'You know that darling little calf who was born on Tuesday?' That was how she used to speak. Everything was darling this and darling that. But my hat, could that girl work? And she had the patience of the job. Here's a lucky farmer who gets her on his farm, I can tell you." Then there was another strange one on the last course. She'd been an actress. She came up to me when she'd been here for a couple of days and said, "I'm worried about the cows this morning. They've got catarrh. I don't like the way they're coughing. It's all this cold weather we give them. It can't be good in such quantities." Well, you'd say, wouldn't you, that anyone who talked like that ought to be back on the stage, but not a bit of it. She got down to work and soon took a really intelligent interest in things. And how that girl changed. She turned up with long red nails, but when she left they were cut short and they weren't very clean either. Although she lived in a state of constant surprise, nothing dismayed her. She would work up to her knees in mud and muck and come out ready for more. You could never tell with women. With fellows you can spot a dud almost at sight, but some of the softest and sloppiest girls are really as tough as they make 'em. Funny, isn't it? What kind of girls do you have on your new course, and where did they come from? I asked. It's a he, this principal. I thought it was a woman. I don't know why. He handed me a list of occupations. Here are some of them: bookkeeper, factory hand, typist, domestic help, shop assistant, milliner, hairdresser, children's nurse, clerk, confectioner, fashion artist, dance instructress, actress, archaeologist, and dressmaker. Such are the varied backgrounds of the maidens whom the most conservative of callings is asked to assimilate in time of war. As the farming might be described as a constant fight with nature based on centuries of prejudice, the farmer is a man who does not take willingly to newfangled ideas, and what could be more newfangled than a manicurist at milking time? We went to see the girls at work. They are given a sound introduction to the various branches of general husbandry. They are taught something about crops and the rotation of crops, about arable land, and about growing of foodstuffs and fruit. They take turns to run a model dairy, a range of pigsties, stables, and a small chicken farm. In a field I found a class learning to drive mechanical tractors and to set ploughs. I thought the girls were extremely workmanlike, and apart from a pardonable bashfulness, it must be something of a shock to come straight from a Remington to a tractor. They were admirable candidates for the land. I asked one girl who was grasping the wheel of a tractor what she thought, what she was doing before she joined the Land Army. "I was a secretary in London," she said. And I asked her why she had chosen the Land Army. "Because I feel land work is real work," she replied. "I don't fancy being drilled wearing khaki, although I know a lot of girls like being in uniform, but then I'm interested in animals and I love the country, even in wet weather and winter. I don't care how hard the work is, how early I have to get up in the morning, or how cold it is, and it's jolly cold now at 6 in the morning. All I want to do is learn enough to be of some use to the land." The girls are not coddled. They have to rise in the dark and go down to the stables and the cowsheds. Their day begins before dawn and ends with darkness. They do all the rough work under the supervision of instructors. They drive cows out into the field in the morning and bring them back in the evening for milking. I watched girls who 10 days before had been working in the city prepare to milk the cows. Some preliminary instruction was given on the mechanical milker, and then the girls, washed and in white overalls, were allowed to approach the genuine animal. First they groomed the cows, and then, taking their milking stools and pails, they got down to work. It was amusing to see with what air of professional brusque, being brisk is, I think, what that means. Yet the temerity some of the maidens smacked the cows over the right side of the stalls, and I admired the courage of one girl who was obviously not fond of these animals at such close quarters, for hers was true courage. A distinguished lady visitor was being shown around at this moment. She approached one of the girls who was engaged in the grooming a cow and asked, "What were you doing before you joined the land army, my dear?" The girl gazed round the corner of the cow and answered, "I was in Bradley's." "Oh, really?" said the woman with interest. "What department?" The girl dropped the cow's tail. "Lingerie," she said. So silence settled over the sheds, broken only by the metallic ping of milk hitting the pail. Secretary, fashion artist, dressmaker, domestic help and shop assistant sat with heads professionally bent towards the beasts, sometimes flinching from a moving hoof, now and then in trouble with a kicked pail. But the sight amazed me. I should never have believed that not one of these girls had ever milked a cow 10 days before. Suddenly the silence was broken by a chatter of voices, and I looked up to see 50 schoolboys, aged about 10 to 14, gazing into the cowshed with faces on which amazement, verging on horror, was plainly written. They were evacuated schoolboys from the Paddington district who had been invited to look over the farm. Everyone knows that milk is neatly crated in bottles and appears on the doorstep in the early morning. To see its origin in this dim, musty shed among the swishing tails and blowing nostrils was, I think, something of a shock to most of the lads. I approached one and asked him if he'd ever seen a cow being milked. "Call lummy, yes," he said, "and I've seen their teeth pulled out." "Where on earth did you see that?" I asked. "Bombay," he replied, and I left him hurriedly for a less sophisticated specimen. The principal of the college, who is keen on interesting towns-children in country matters, loves to have evacuated girls and boys on the farm, and after they've seen it, he lines them up and asks them if they have any questions. When he does so, hands instantly shoot up. These are some of the questions asked by the London boys. "How many eggs can a hen lay in a day?" "How old is a pig before he's killed?" "How much hay does a cow eat in a day?" "Is any preservative added to milk before it's sold?" One boy came up to me and said, "I've been drinking milk straight from a cow. It's warm and fuzzy." I lined them up and asked them who wanted to go back to London to put up their hands. Not one was lifted. The schoolmaster told me that almost a normal day's schooling is now going on, and the people in the town where the children are billeted could not be kinder to them. That bore out my impression, gained all over the country, of the genuine kindness with which people in general, and country people in particular, have treated children from the town. We have learned too much from the other side. The grousing of town-stick, grumbling mothers have been given too much publicity. This is not only mischievous, I think is the American version. This is not only mischievous, but it is not fair or true reflection of the situation. Were it true, it would be terrible reflection on the charity and kindness of the nation. Cows, says lovely Julia, often don't seem groomed these days unless they're going to be show. I live to groom a cow. Ah, bless you. I love to groom a cow, she says. Hi, Richard. It's Ryan from the email. Hope you're doing okay. Thank you very much, Ryan. I am doing okay. Okay, back in sync now. Sorry, did you lose the sync? Great impressions. Hello, Roland, sorry. I do my best. I'm glad you are enjoying it. If in years to come anyone should ask me what it was like to travel through England during the first weeks of Hitler's war, I should say that the outstanding emotion was one of incredulity. A generation brought up during the rise, decline and fall of the League of Nations and taught by politicians and writers that war was evil, painful and out of date. A generation firmly pacifist in mentality and believing in its heart of hearts that years of crisis were only newspaper talk, was suddenly faced by the incredible. The last vestige of romance had long since been stripped from war. Only the Royal Air Force and the Navy were capable of stirring the imagination. The army, which had never been popular in England, was less attractive than ever in its lorries and battle dress, and only when the boys went overseas did something of the warm spirit of 1914 to 18 come back to England, as wives and mothers packed up parcels to send to the front. The incredulity was deepened because the incredible having happened, it had not happened in accordance with prophecy. The great air raids on cities, which had been prophesied for years as the inevitable prelude to the next war, had not taken place. Millions of people, at the instigation of the authorities, had made a room gas-proof with brown paper and tape. Yet the promised gas attack had not occurred. Millions had deformed their gardens with air raid shelters, yet there had been no air raid. Nothing seemed to be going according to plan. It was, of course, fortunate, but how bewildering it was. Almost like expecting COVID to knock out half the population, and yet that didn't happen. There was a feeling throughout the country that this queer, unexpected waiting time was due entirely to Hitler's realization that now at last he had taken on someone of his own weight, that Poland had been savagely attacked and vanquished, and that no Pole could call it a phony war did not affect the English point of view because, as everyone knew, such horrible things often happened in foreign countries. Poland was just another example of hitting a fellow smaller than yourself. But England and France were another story. No wonder Hitler was thinking twice before he started anything big on the Western Front. We should do the starting. And the fact that he had not yet gassed us or raided us proved that he was not anxious to get busy. That was the kind of talk we heard. While everyone spoke of the lunacy of war, no one doubted the inevitability of the war. I heard men at the benches of armament factories, works managers and directors of armament firms speak of war as madness, yet all agreed that England had no choice but to go to war in order to give Hitler a licking that he's been asking for. I met no one who feared that we might lose the war. Indeed, I detected in many parts of the country a dangerous tendency to underestimate the enemy. Many bets had been taken in factories all over the country that the war would be over before Christmas 1939. There was a strange absence of grousing. No one would have believed that so vast a social upheaval as the removal of hundreds of thousands of women and children from their homes into other homes could have occurred with less trouble. People were extraordinarily generous and patient. The only trouble was caused by town-sick mothers who loathed the country by the introduction of verminous children into clean households, and by well-to-do people whose servants walked out when the evacuees walked in. But the question asked everywhere was, what is going to happen, and when is the war going to begin? The inaction bred a bewilderment which one enemy air raid would have dispelled overnight. It would probably be true to say that England went to war in the spirit not of a fiery crusade, but rather in the mood of a national rat week. There was no flag waving, no bands, no appeals to patriotism, no pictures of the King and Queen. No one knew the names of any of the generals or admirals, and the attempt on the part of the press to give Tiger Gort heroic status fell completely flat. The cold, objective attitude of the government and that of the Prime Minister, who rattled his umbrella ominously once or twice, did not exactly help the country get excited about war. There was nothing full-blooded about it, and indeed, how could there be when the mental attitude for a quarter of the century in Parliament, the press, and the platforms had been one of disarmament and pacifism? It would have been difficult if the expected air raids had happened, for then the country would have been plunged at once into suffering and anger. But the tepid attitude of the government was such that it seemed to be apologising for war, while calling upon the country to plunge into the war effort, at the same time deplored the necessity for doing so, which was extremely confusing. A good old swing back to 1914 with appeals to king and country, with brass bands and Hitler burned in effigy, would have worked wonders with the spirit of the country, but no one knew how to do it, or was willing to do it, deeming it perhaps undignified, or maybe fearing that an attempt to whip up a war spirit may have been a flop. But of course, it would not have been a flop. One or two people in the Ministry of Information became alarmed by the apathy, and there was some talk of working up a hate campaign. But it is typical of the thought of time. But it is typical of the thought of the time and the attitude of the rulers of the mysterious populace that it was not called a hate campaign, but an anger campaign. It was never launched, and the horrible stories from Czechoslovakia and Poland were never permitted to work the country into a white heat of fury, as the Belgian atrocities had done in the War of 1418. What England wanted in the first months of the war was a full-blooded leader who would have given blow for blow and have expressed the contempt and indignation that existed in England for tyrants and aggressors. It seemed to be the first hour of English history that had not produced its man. To anyone familiar with the placid English scene, the outward transformation was almost amusing. It was entirely fantastic to see English towns and villages, trenches and sandbags that recalled the Ypres salient. A policeman in a steel helmet standing outside a village policeman was a sight for the comic muse, while windows crisscrossed with brown gummed paper as a protection against blast, and open spaces and parks invaded by trenches, and front gardens by air raid shelters, gave the town and country an untidy, squalid air of waiting for the unthinkable. Only in and around the cities and towns was the war atmosphere noticeable. It was easy to pass out of this into rural areas where the war might never have been in progress and where ARP was still a bit of a joke. As shops everywhere were full and food was plentiful, the inhabitants of villages were thinking less about the war and its problems about the short... Oh, wait a minute. As shops everywhere were full and food were plentiful, the inhabitants of villages were thinking less about the war and its problems than about the shortcomings of city dwellers who had been introduced into their homes. Shopkeepers everywhere were alarmed by prospects of declining trade by the government interference. Some of them had expected another business-as-usual war, and they didn't realise, and no one informed them, that a totalitarian war is fought by a nation in uniform and overalls. It does not matter how much peacetime commerce dies, as long as the war industries live. Indeed, the more peacetime shops that close, the better the state likes it. But where is the money to come from if we can't pay our income tax? Inquired many simple-minded citizens. Others, wiser in their generation, asked, "What is money? And did lack of money ever stop a war? The blackout was one of the ruling facts of life. It stopped the traveller in his tracks. It drove millions of people into their homes. It killed the life of the great cities at tea time and filled them with an eerie silence and a mystery. No one could have believed before the war that all the great cities of England, even London itself, could have been utterly abandoned to the dark. So frightened was it at first that even the burglars stayed at home. So upon a winter's day, I returned from my journey through wartime England, vaguely disturbed by the apathy of a nation that lacked a leader, a nation that was not even half at war, a nation sound as a bell, loyal and determined, warlike but not military, a nation waiting, almost pathetically, for something, anything, to happen. Oh, I beg your pardon, there's a postscript. This is the postscript. How are we doing? Let's have a quick look at the comments. The French asking for ludicrous reparations of the First World War helped trigger World War II, says Michael Angel. I haven't received any podcast email today. I assumed hadn't done. No, I haven't done a Naked Englishman podcast this morning. I was out with Mr. Suggett filming, actually, and I've been busy ever since, trying to get the studio all set up. 2 shoes and slippers. Poor bloke who... 2 shows, this and then the Vogue show later. Right, okay, cool. Nearly there. This is the post script. Almost 12 months to the day from the time I set out to travel through peacetime England, Holland was conquered. Belgium fell. Italy entered the war on Germany's side. France collapsed and the British Army was brought home from Dunkirk. Upon the 11th of August 1940, 400 German aircraft attacked the British coast, and the Battle of Britain had begun. We heard the crash of bombs by day and by night. The summer sky was streaked with high white lines and spirals. The sounds of machine guns came out of the clouds, and sometimes we heard the scream of a shot plane diving to its end. When darkness fell, we saw the summer night red with burning fires as we stood, rifle or shotgun in hand, guarding our little bit of England. It was a still night. The moon was hidden by high cloud. I stood on the church tower watching and listening. Pale fields of oats moved in the night wind, glimmering like water. When I climbed the belfry ladders a few moments ago to keep the second watch, I came out on the leaded-covered tower with its breast-high parapet, and there I saw outlined against the sky the heroic shape of my companion. His forage cap may have been a Norman helmet or a medieval casque, and I paused in admiration, telling myself with incredulity that it was only old Tom Burns, the cowman from the Brambles. At the sound of my approach, the figure turned in a rich, loamy voice and said, These searchlights be proper busy over Gallows Hill way tonight." Then old Tom turned heavily and, insinuating his bulk frame into the trap door, vanished into the stone tube of darkness, leaving me alone upon the church tower. And now the clouds part and the moon shining through cast green shadows so that I can see the little hamlet lying below among the haystacks and fields, the lime-washed cottages with front gardens bright with Canterbury bells, geraniums and poppies, and I think that a more peaceful bit of old England could not be found than this village of ours. Yet in every cottage sleeps an armed man. If I rang the bell now, they would come running out with rifles ready to defend their homes. Such a thing has not happened in Britain since the Middle Ages. It would not surprise me to know that a generation to come will look back upon these trials and anxieties which now beset us as the most dramatic and adventurous incident in the whole of England's history. I think one is particularly conscious of this in a country district full of old farmhouses which have been standing for centuries, buildings whose panelling conceals secret rooms, whose wide chimneys lead to priests' holes, whose windows have known the tap of a secret code in the night, whose barns and outhouses have stabled many a strange horse and concealed many a mysterious rider. As I look down on the sleeping village and away over the dark woodlands to such places as Brackett's Farm, a notorious hiding place for the Cavaliers during the Civil War, I think that the awareness of these once sleepy old villages is merely a return of their youth. Danger has skipped us for a century or two, and now we are back in danger, with a gun under the bed and an ear cocked for the sound of a signal. Nothing I have known in English life has approached the eagerness with which ordinary men have run to arms in order to defend their homes. My own point of view, and indeed it is that of all farmers, the farm labourers and the cowmen who compose our home guard, is that, should the rest of England fall, our own parish would hold out to the last man. The responsibility of defending our own village has given to that village a gigantic significance in its eyes. To us, it seems the main objective of any invader. When I look at the map, and I am sometimes amazed to see how small and unimportant it must appear to anyone not in our platoon, but if all the villages throughout England think as we do, what a hedge of opposition they present to anyone who dares to set an invader's foot upon this island. Standing up there like some baron's man brooding on the parish matters, it comes to me that one of the most remarkable things about this war is the quiet way England has ceased to be a country or even a county for many of us, and has become a parish. All over our land, villages once proclaimed dead and done for having awakened to arms. People scarcely on speaking terms have come together to organise defence. Crossroads, ditches, hedges and old tumble-down barns have achieved an unsuspected importance after survey by the slightly myopic eyes of those of us who were soldiers 20 years ago. I, who once thought of England as a whole and was in the habit of going to Cornwall or Cumberland on the spare of a moment, have not left my parish for months. Neither do I wish to. My parish has become England. This is a wonderful thing, and I never get tired of thinking about it. Since France collapsed and flung us all back into the early 19th century, with Boney on the doorstep, life in the country districts of England have become romantic and realistic. Danger has given us a common purpose. It has given us a meeting place. It has accomplished for the villages of England what musical young men from Oxford with bells on their knees and earnest women in Liberty silk gowns hoped to do a decade ago. It has made England almost merry again. It has blown into the flames smouldering local loyalties and traditions. It has roused the English genius from improvisation. It has brought us face to face with the fact that we love our country well enough to die for her. Another remarkable feature of wartime England is our almost unconscious slide back into the atmosphere of the 17th century. Here we are today, surrounded by those shining achievements of science and invention, aeroplanes, cars, wireless, yet we are really living in an isolation unknown for 300 years. The excellent roads which we can no longer use and the smooth voices of those who read the news from broadcasting a house afford us the illusion that we are living in a modern world. But it is only an illusion. Our post bags have shrunk to almost 17th century proportions. And those friends who still occasionally write to us are concerned, if they have anything to say at all, with simple 17th century matters such as the preservation of fruit, the growth of increased crops, the keeping of hens and goats, of geese, and of course current events in the parish. In spite of our cars and our range of movement is probably less than that of an energetic horseman a century ago. So, confined to our parishes by responsibility, lack of petrol, and also, let us hope, by the knowledge that there is no better place in wartime, we have, without realizing it, tapped wells of satisfaction which have begun to dry up when the world became restless and irresponsible. When the social historian reviews modern England, I should not be surprised if he came to the conclusion that, so far as movement and social life go, we are today in a more secluded backwater than our ancestors of the Napoleonic period. Reading the histories and memoirs of the time, I had the impression that life in those days of professional armies went on as much as usual. Prize fighting continued, the coaches were running, London was not made into a shabby area of self-defence, and if Martello Towers ringed the coast, and militia and yeomanry numbered 500,000, English life was not interrupted by Napoleon, as it had been interrupted by Hitler. But Hitler has struck the same fine sparks from England. For this, we owe him gratitude. He may have led us along the primrose path to bankruptcy, but in the process we have touched old simplicities and have known again the feeling that we belong to our country and our country belongs to us. Still proud as I am to be parochial, I confess that, as I stand on guard, I relieve the weary hours with memories of those lovely places in England, which I may not see again until the war is over. My mind flies from the downs of Sussex to the grey stone country of the Cotswolds, from the luscious Midland shires to the cold walled country of the north. I remember how the waves come rushing up the white face of Flamborough Head, how the tide leaps upon Lindisfarne, how the Bore runs between the banks of the Severn, and how the slow sweet Avon sings through Warwick's meadows. I think of Ely kneeling like a nun above the fenlands, of Durham like a knight in armour, most pious of fortresses, and of Galilee there, so eastern and mosque-like, as if a crusader bringing some trophy from the Holy Land had planted it on the hill above the weir. I love to remember Wells and Exeter, Winchester and Salisbury, Hereford, Worcester and Gloucester. I remember the walls of Chester, the minster bells of York, silent now, the Seven Sisters rising like a hymn, Beverley and then the moors, fountains, a white ghost on the green grass, Rivlou and Jervlou, I never know how you pronounce those, the high castles of the Welsh marches, and by way of contrast, Oxford and Cambridge too, the ripe red fields of Devon, and the wild splendour of Exmoor. Then my eyes fall to the nearness of my own parish, to the group of ancient cottages, the thatched barns, the cornfields and the dark woods. And I say to myself, how good it is to have been given the chance to guard a few square miles of England. And now my watch is drawing to an end. The light is coming into the sky. The first larks are up. The general chorus of birdsong, which will soon drown them, has not yet begun. Colour is slowly welling back to the field and copse. The night has passed with nothing to report. That is strange and lovely in these days, nothing to report. I climb down the 3 perpendicular ladders. At the foot of the belfry, old Tom stirs in his blanket. "What, 5 o'clock already? Holy Moses, they pigs must be attended to at once. The old sow was not looking good last night. A delicate old sow she be, and she don't take to this here new swill." Well, let's fill in the logbook. Nothing to report. Visibility good. Searchlights active on the first watch. He gets out his bicycle and goes off into the fresh morning. And I remember how heroic he looked in the darkness, leaning out against the stars. Old Tom, the cowman, up at the brambles. And that, my friends, is it. 2 Englands by H. Look at that, with 15 minutes spare. So, what did you think about that? Did you enjoy that? Thank you very much for listening. It's an interesting ending, leaving him there on the church tower guarding against what might possibly happen. And of course, we all know what happened. I can't remember now. What happened? Did we? Oh yeah, we're all right. Linda Kane. Well, that was moving. It was actually. I found that quite tricky to read at the end because I could feel the patriotism stirring up in me and almost quelling over me. I think it was the same with J.B. Priestley's book when he was summing up in his. There is a. I don't know how you call it. What you call it? It's a. There's something in one. Lee Lawson. Oh, so late. You've just missed the end. You've just come in at the end. Now, I have a couple of choices, and I haven't brought the others in. I might just nip. I don't know if I can find them. I've got one book here, which I've half read myself, which is quite interesting. It might be more interesting if I'm reading it aloud. There's also a book by... Oh, I can't remember his name. Hutchinson? Somebody? The author of Tarka, the Otter. He sets up a farm. I've got a couple of his books. He's a nice writer. He sets up a farm, and it's all about him setting up the farm. I wanted to find a book that was from a one-person perspective, rather than a book about anything that's written without a narrator, as it were. It's too factual. So I've got a book here by Edward Blishen. I don't know if you've heard of Edward Blishen, author of The Roaring Boys and The Right Soft Lot. He recounts his wartime experiences. It's called A Cack-Handed War, and he is a conscientious objector. Let me tell you what it says about the book. So, A Cack-Handed War by Edward Blishen. The many devoted admirers of Roaring Boys and This Right Soft Lot will be prepared for the grace of style and humour which suffice his new work by the same author. But in this memoir of his life as a conscientious objector during the Second World War, Edward Blishen strikes a richer and deeper strain. There is more than an entertaining exercise in nostalgia. more than an evocative of perplexing and traumatic episode in our history, more than a sympathetic description of many varied people in their wartime occupations. It is all these things, but also a journey of the soul, the unfolding and resolution of the author's personal dilemma. While war thunders about him, sometimes near, sometimes far, he works on the land among strangers of many religious and political complexions. The seasons come and go, the jobs change, but are always hard to learn and boring. There are new companions and old companions, but there's always the land and there's always the weather. This is a great beauty, with many remembered moments of joy among the days and months of slogging misery. It is also a work of very deep understanding, moving, robust, constantly illuminating. £2 net in the UK only. Oh, sorry, I wasn't supposed to read that. This was published in it's published in 1972. So that's a possibility. I don't know what you think about that. Fly Fishing by J.R. Henry Williamson, that was the one. That's what I was thinking about. Yeah, Henry Williamson. Ring of Bright Water was the true story. Yeah, I think it was based on the true accounts. Mark Donovan, good stuff, Richard. Patriotism seems almost a dirty word these days for so many privileged and pampered youth with no respect to the nation they live in. Yes, absolutely true. Sounds interesting. That's good. The other one is there's that. The other one. This is a fantastic read as well, although it's quite long. The Worm Forgives the Plough. It's a similar thing. I've read this one. John Stuart Collis left his comfortable life as an academic to work on the land for the war effort. It's a similar sort of thing. He accounts for his time, perfectly captures the city dweller's naivety and the wonder both at the working nature and the toughness of life on a farm. Collis's thoughtful curiosity leads him to explore a broad variety of subjects, from humorous sketches of the characters he works alongside to beautiful written pieces. I read one that was an interesting. But I have read that one. This one I haven't read all the way through. The print on this is titchy as well. That's another thing. Ring of Bright Water was by Gavin Maxwell, not Williamson. Yeah, the Tarka the Otter is the one. Tarka the Otter, is it Tarka the Otter? Is the one by Williamson. I like the sound of cack-handed war, says Lee Lawson. I found the last few minutes of Two Englands very moving. Yeah, cack-handed war. It's it's interesting. Shall we give it a try? If we don't like it, we can always stop. How about that? See how it goes. All right, I'm going to end there because it's 10:02. We'll try that one tomorrow, 4 o'clock. Cack-handed war. Sounds great. I have read half of it, and I do know it is enjoyable. I think it's going to be, what is a cack? That's a good question. We'll find out. Yeah, it's. I think it'd be more enjoyable read out than, sometimes you can read a book when you read it to yourself and you start nodding off, but sometimes when you read it out. But let's see how I think he's a good writer. Anyway, I'm gonna end now, and we'll start again tomorrow. So that will be good. And just so I've got a thumbnail to use for tomorrow, I'm just going to hold that up. Hang on, I need to put a smiley face next to it. There we go. I can screen grab that at the appropriate moment. Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I'll be doing a Vogue show later on if everything's all running properly. So take care, look after yourselves, and I'll catch up with you later. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye. Thanks for coming.